They called my daughter the dumb kid of the divorce. Loud enough for her to hear. Loud enough for me to hear. The judges walked past her science project like it was invisible. One of them smirked. Another whispered to a colleague, and they both laughed. I stood frozen, my heart pounding, fighting back a rage I could barely contain, wondering how much more my little girl could take before she cracked. Her name is Ari. She is 11. She built something with her own hands, something she was proud of. She spent weeks scavenging through junk drawers, salvaging wires, reading online science journals way beyond her grade level. And when she walked into that school gym with her head held high despite all the whispers, I prayed someone would finally see her. But they didn't. Not until a stranger walked in. He wasn't part of the school. No clipboard, no judge's badge. Just a tall man in a blazer with silver hair. And the kind of quiet presence that made people notice. He stopped at her booth. He asked her questions. He listened. Then he looked at me with eyes that didn't waver and said, "This needs to be patented." That was the moment the air shifted. My name is Ari Rivera, and for the past 5 years, it's been just me and Ari. We live in a small steel town in Pennsylvania, the kind of place where front doors still get handwritten notes about uncut grass, and where gossip spreads faster than weather warnings. People here don't forget, and they don't let you forget either. I married Rick right out of high school. He was charming, clever, and completely unready to be a father. When Ari was 6, he left without a word. Just a text. "This isn't the life I want." And that was it. After that, the whispers started. People said I must have pushed him away. Said I was reckless. Said I should have known better. I didn't have time to defend myself. I was working 2 jobs, diner waitress in the mornings, warehouse stalker at night. Every cent went to rent, bills, and keeping Ari fed, clothed, and in school with a full backpack and a fake smile. Pride had no place in my life. I showed up to school events with greasy hair under a baseball cap, my eyes ringed in exhaustion. The other moms would give me that nod. The polite, empty one. Then they would turn back to their conversations about summer camps and vacation rentals. I didn't belong there, and I never tried to. I was there for Ari. That's all that mattered. Ari has always been different. Quiet, deeply observant, endlessly curious. She doesn't crave attention. She doesn't need a crowd. Give her broken earbuds, dead batteries, and a roll of tape, and she's in heaven. Since she was little, she's loved figuring out how things work. She once dismantled a hairdryer just to use the fan motor for a homemade wind tunnel. One evening, I came home from a 12-hour shift and found the kitchen table covered in wires, magnets, and duct tape. She looked up at me with the most serious face and said, "I think I can make electricity from shoes." I laughed, not to mock her. I was just exhausted. But she didn't laugh. She kept talking about kinetic energy, conductors, and power grids in off-grid villages. That's when she asked if she could join the school's science fair. Her voice was so soft, like she already expected me to say no. And for a moment, I almost did. The entry fee, the materials, the transportation, it felt impossible. But when I saw the look in her eyes, I knew I had to find a way. So I picked up more shifts. I borrowed gas money from my brother. I told her to go for it. For the next 3 weeks, our apartment turned into a mini laboratory. Ari converted an old pair of sneakers into a kinetic energy generator that could light up a bulb with every step. Her idea was that if scaled, it could provide small bursts of electricity in remote areas. Just enough to charge a light, a phone, maybe power a water pump. She scavenged copper coils, LED strips from broken flashlights, and pieces from busted chargers. She logged everything in a spiral notebook, each test, each failure, each improvement. She called her project Power in Your Step. The night before the fair, she packed everything with care, labeled the boxes in neat handwriting, painted her display board by hand. She even ironed her older cousin's button-down shirt and wore it like a lab coat. That morning, she looked at herself in the mirror and said, "They don't have to like it. I just want them to understand it." I thought I would burst with pride. But at the fair, it was like we walked into a different world. The gym was filled with glossy displays, giant posters, flashy gadgets. Some kids had hired help from tutors. Some had parents who used 3D printers or bought materials online. Ari's station was at the very back, beside a stack of unused folding chairs. No greetings. No smiles. Just silence. She set up her project carefully. Tested the shoe bulb. It worked. She smiled. But then the girls at the next table pointed. One whispered to another. That's the kid whose dad ran off, right? Yeah, and her mom works at that dumpy diner. The second girl laughed behind her hand. My stomach clenched. I looked around for a teacher, but there was nothing. Just a PTA mom watching me, whispering behind her travel mug. The judges came. 3 of them. 2 men, 1 woman. They barely looked. One guy said, "What's this?" "Shoe lights." Ari stood straighter. It's a motion-powered energy generator that lights an LED. It's made from recycled materials. I think it could help remote communities. He was already walking away before she finished. The woman judge glanced once and said, "That's cute," and left. Cute. That was her word. Not brilliant. Not innovative. Just cute. Ari didn't cry, but her eyes shifted toward me, then toward the exit. I clenched my fists so tight my palms burned. I wanted to storm down there and drag her out. Tell her we didn't need this. That she was too good for them. But she didn't move. She just sat there beside her project, silent, still hoping someone would see her. And I realized she wasn't giving up. Not yet. The gym was buzzing with noise, laughing parents, clapping teachers, the hum of excitement from tables where kids showed off glittery volcanoes and wind-powered robots. But in the back, at a table with a cardboard sign and scuffed-up sneakers, my daughter stood like a statue. Ari's eyes didn't flicker. She watched the judges walk away, without a word. She watched classmates pack up their flashy projects. But she didn't pack hers. Not yet. She stood next to it like it still mattered. Like someone might still see. I sat on the bleachers, my hands clenched around my knees so tightly I couldn't feel my fingers. My eyes stayed locked on Ari. I could see her chest rise and fall with deep, slow breaths, the way she did when she was trying not to cry. But she didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She stayed standing, her chin up, her hands clasped behind her back the way I had seen scientists stand during interviews on the videos she watched late into the night. She had practiced that stance, I realized. She had prepared for this moment. And they had crushed her in under 2 minutes. I couldn't sit anymore. I stood and took a step toward her, not even sure what I planned to say. Maybe to tell her it was okay. Maybe to say we could leave. But then I stopped. There was a boy at her table. He was younger, maybe 9 or 10. He asked her a question. She answered. Quietly. Carefully. She stepped on the shoe to show him how it lit the bulb. His face lit up too. He smiled and said something that made Ari laugh. And in that moment I knew. She wasn't done. Not yet. That's when he walked in. Not a parent. Not a teacher. Not a judge. A tall man, older, with silver hair and calm eyes. He looked out of place in his crisp blue blazer and clean dress shoes. He wasn't holding a clipboard or a coffee. He was just walking, scanning each table with interest, not just glancing but really looking. He passed a solar-powered fan project and nodded politely. He paused at a color-changing slime experiment and asked a few questions. Then he reached Ari's table. He didn't move on. He asked a question. Ari straightened. She explained the project, starting from the pressure plate inside the shoe to the copper coil that triggered the light. He listened without interrupting. Then he asked to see her notebook. She handed it over with both hands, like it was sacred. He flipped through slowly, page by page, pausing to examine her wiring diagrams, voltage measurements and messy but detailed calculations. His brow furrowed. His mouth tightened, not with confusion but focus. Then he looked up. First at Ari, then at me. This isn't just clever, he said. His voice was low but firm. This needs to be patented. The words echoed. The room didn't go silent, not immediately. But the people nearest us turned. The PTA moms glanced up. The kids next to Ari stopped fiddling with their remote-controlled tower. One of the judges froze mid-step and looked over his shoulder. The silver-haired man extended his hand to Ari and introduced himself. Professor Marcus Ellison, he said. I teach mechanical engineering at MIT. I'm in town visiting my niece. I blinked. Ari just stood there, stunned, Her small hand caught in his firm handshake. He turned to me and said, "Has anyone else recognized what she's built here?" I shook my head. No words came. He nodded as if that confirmed something important. Then he reached into his jacket and handed me a card. "Get in touch. There's a nonprofit I work with. They help young inventors file patents, find mentors, and protect their ideas. She's not just talented. She's original." By now all eyes were on Ari. Even the judge who had called her project some kind of shoe light earlier came walking back. He cleared his throat, awkwardly resetting his presence like he could erase the way he had dismissed her. "Could you explain it again?" he asked. Ari looked at me. I didn't say a word. I just nodded. She turned to the judge and began again, this time slower, more confidently. She explained the kinetic energy transfer, how the compressed coil generated current, how recycled materials could bring electricity to places with no power grid. She showed her notebook. She pointed out the changes she'd made during testing. The judge listened. He actually listened. Then the woman judge arrived, the one who called it cute. This time she asked detailed questions. She took notes. She examined the wiring. She asked how long the bulb stayed lit and how scalable the design was. Ari answered everything. I stood back and watched, barely breathing. She wasn't smiling yet, but her voice no longer trembled. Her hands moved with precision. Her words had weight now. Other kids gathered around. The ones who had laughed earlier were suddenly quiet. The air had shifted completely. Professor Ellison stayed by the table, arms crossed, watching with a quiet pride, like he already knew the outcome. At one point, I leaned closer to him and whispered, "Thank you." He shook his head. "I didn't do anything. I just saw what was already there." The award ceremony was short and awkward. Ari didn't win first place, but they gave her a ribbon for innovation. It was clear they had made it up on the spot. It didn't matter. Not to Ari. Not to me. Later that night, back at home, she taped that ribbon to our refrigerator. Then she sat down at the kitchen table, took apart her prototype, and started sketching new designs. She didn't care about the praise. She was already thinking about what came next. And I sat across from her, staring at Professor Ellison's business card, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Ari didn't sleep much that night. I could hear her chair creaking through the thin apartment walls, the soft click of her pen, the occasional sigh as she scribbled, paused, and scribbled again. When I peeked through the door at 2 a.m, she was still at her desk. Her sneakers sat beside her, their wires carefully removed, their soles cut open like dissected organs. The journal she kept was now layered with new diagrams, neater, sharper. She was redesigning everything. Not because anyone told her to. Not because she had a deadline. But because her mind refused to rest. The next morning, she was already awake before I could heat the water for tea. Her eyes were heavy, but her voice was calm, steady. "I think I can make the charge hold longer," she said, showing me the notebook with a revised coil placement. "If I add a buffer capacitor between the wire and the LED, the light might stay on a few seconds after each step." I just stared at her, stunned again by how far ahead she already was. She wasn't chasing a ribbon anymore. She was chasing real-world solutions. That weekend, we had our first video call with the nonprofit Professor Ellison had connected us to. Ari sat in front of my old laptop, wearing the same button-down shirt she'd ironed for the science fair, her hair tied back, her hands folded neatly in front of her. On the screen were 4 people, 2 engineers, a patent advisor, and a program coordinator named Janelle Yates. Janelle smiled warmly and said, "Hi Ari. We're so excited to meet you." And for the first time, I saw my daughter hesitate. Not because she was nervous, but because she was overwhelmed. No one had ever spoken to her like that. With respect. With expectation. Like she was someone who mattered. She nodded slowly and replied, "Thank you. I'm excited too." The next hour was like watching a switch flip. The engineers asked about the power source, the torque of the coil, the angle of compression. Ari answered, sometimes fumbling, but mostly sharp, prepared, unshakable. When she didn't know something, she said so and asked how to find out. The advisors didn't talk down to her. They guided her through what provisional patents involved, what steps she'd need to take, and what kind of mentorship she could receive. I sat on the edge of my chair, barely breathing, trying to follow every term, every piece of advice. But Ari? She was taking notes. Real ones. She asked about voltage regulation. She asked if certain adhesives could degrade over time under movement. One of the engineers leaned forward and said, "I didn't know half of this until college." That made Ari smile just a little. They assigned her a mentor. Janelle, a software engineer who had grown up in a small rural town just like ours. Janelle told her, "You're not an exception. There are more kids like you. You just got brave at the right time." That sentence stayed with me. Bravery wasn't loud in Ari. It didn't roar or punch walls. It was quiet, focused, persistent. It was waking up early and going to bed late. It was risking humiliation and showing up anyway. Every Saturday morning after that, Ari went to the public library with my beat-up laptop and her notebook. She worked through video calls, research articles, engineering blogs. She was obsessed with improving the voltage-to-step ratio. She wanted the light to last longer, shine brighter, be used in disaster relief or refugee camps. She had moved far past the school gym now. She was thinking about the world. At school, things changed slowly. Her science teacher pulled her aside and asked if she'd speak to younger classes about electricity and recycling. The same classmates who had mocked her now watched her from a distance, unsure how to act. And Ari? She didn't change. She didn't gloat. She just kept working. One afternoon, I caught her explaining her design to two second graders in the hallway. They stood wide-eyed as she told them about kinetic transfer and light energy. One of them asked, "Are you famous now?" Ari just smiled. "No. I'm still figuring things out." The local newspaper ran a story. Sixth grader invents power generator using sneakers. It was cheesy but sweet. They took a picture of her holding the prototype, wearing her makeshift lab coat. A week later, a letter arrived. A private middle school from a nearby city had read the article and offered her a partial scholarship if she wanted to transfer. I asked Ari if she was interested. She shook her head. "I don't want to leave the library." That was my daughter. Brilliant, loyal, focused, but not untouched. One night, as we were cleaning up dinner, she suddenly asked, "Mom, if Professor Ellison hadn't come to the fair, would anyone ever have seen my project?" I paused. I didn't know how to answer. I didn't want to lie. I didn't want to crush her either. So I told her the truth. "Maybe not. But you still would have built it. And I still would have been proud." She looked down at the table, then whispered, "It's weird. I thought being seen would feel better." I put my hand on hers. "You were never building this to be seen. You were building because you couldn't not build. That's what makes you different." She nodded. And after a moment, she smiled again, softly, but with that same determination I saw the day she told me she could make electricity from shoes. She wasn't chasing praise. She was chasing possibility. And that, I realized, was what made her unstoppable. In the months that followed, Ari kept building. Not just with her hands, but with her mind. Every question became a blueprint. Every failure became a new path. Her Saturdays were no longer spent in front of cartoons or buried in homework. They were spent dissecting YouTube lectures on microcapacitance, emailing questions to Janelle, or sketching revised coil systems. Our refrigerator was now covered in test results and voltage charts. Her ribbon still taped in the corner like a quiet reminder of what had started it all. But outside our apartment, the world didn't fully change with her. The same people who had once whispered behind their coffee cups now smiled a little too wide when they saw us at the store. Parents who hadn't said a word at the science fair were suddenly curious. They asked how Ari was doing. If she'd be on the news again. If she'd outgrown our little town soon. I smiled back, polite, guarded. I knew the difference between admiration and performance. Ari knew too. She would nod, thank them, and move on. She wasn't building for applause. School had grown quieter for her. Not cruel, but quieter. Respectful in a distant way. Like people didn't know how to talk to her anymore. Teachers handed back assignments with fewer red marks and more quiet glances. One even wrote, "Impressive insight" on a science report. Ari didn't react. She just tucked it into her folder like it was any other paper. But when we got home that night, she pinned it to her wall, just below a printout of her latest circuit diagram. Then one day, she came home holding a flyer. Youth Inventors Regional Showcase, it said. An event sponsored by the State University, inviting middle school students to present original innovations. Janelle forwarded this to me, she said, placing it on the table like something fragile. Do you think we could go? I looked at the location. 3 hours away. 2 days long. Entry fees, hotel, gas. I didn't say no. I just stared at the flyer, thinking of my rent envelope, the empty fridge, the oil change I had postponed twice already. Ari didn't push. She simply nodded. It's okay if we can't. I just thought I'd ask. That night after she went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my calculator, my pay stubs, and a worn-out notebook where I tracked every dollar. I called in a favor to my cousin in the city. I begged for an extra shift at the diner. And then I circled the date on the calendar. We were going. Ari spent the next 3 weeks building a new prototype. She added rechargeable cells, upgraded the coil, redesigned the enclosure with 3D printed parts donated by a local tech volunteer who had read the newspaper article. She coded a simple interface that could track each step's voltage output. I didn't understand half of it, but she explained it all to me anyway, patiently, like I was the student now, and I was learning who she was becoming. The morning of the showcase, we packed everything into 2 cardboard boxes and an old suitcase with a broken zipper. Ari wore the same button-down shirt, now neatly pressed again, and a pair of jeans she had outgrown by half an inch. I had $20 left in my wallet after gas. But it didn't matter. The event was held in a massive atrium at the university's tech building. Bright lights, rows of tables, polished floors. Most of the kids had matching polo shirts, team banners, custom-printed brochures. Ari had a trifold display board with hand-drawn illustrations and a shoebox holding her latest creation. And once again, we were assigned a spot in the back row. I braced myself. For the looks. For the whispers. For the cold politeness. But this time, something different happened. Within an hour, 2 other students had wandered over, asking genuine questions. A professor stopped to watch Ari explain her circuit. Then another. One of the showcase organizers asked if she could present again. This time in front of a camera crew filming for a local educational broadcast. Ari didn't flinch. She stood taller, lifted the shoebox, and started from the beginning, just like she had practiced. Her voice was steady. Her words clear. This device converts kinetic motion into usable electricity, using a modified coil compression system. Each step a user takes stores energy in capacitors that can light LEDs or charge small devices. I built it to explore renewable energy applications for people who don't have access to power grids. The man behind the camera lowered his gear. You built this yourself? Ari nodded. Mostly. I had guidance. But I designed and assembled it alone. That evening, as the crowd thinned and the tables began to fold, Ari sat beside me on a bench overlooking the campus courtyard. The sun had turned the buildings gold. She was quiet. Not tired, but full in a different way. Like her mind had found the space it needed. I didn't win anything, she said softly. I nodded. I know. She glanced sideways. But this time I didn't need to. I looked at her and saw something I hadn't noticed before. Not just confidence, but peace. She had stepped into the world as herself, without needing to prove she belonged. Before we left, one of the judges caught up with us in the parking lot. A woman with kind eyes and a badge from the university's engineering department. Ari, she said, we'd love to invite you to our summer mentorship lab. It's for young inventors. Hands-on work, real prototypes, university tools. You'd be the youngest, but we think you're ready. Ari stared at her, stunned. Really? The woman smiled. Really? You're not just ahead. You're rare. We stood there, caught in the glow of something I couldn't describe. The kind of moment that doesn't come with trophies or ribbons, but with a door quietly swinging open. And my daughter, with a recycled shoe in her hand and copper wire in her pocket, stepped through it without hesitation. It had been almost 7 months since the science fair. 7 months since Ari stood in that overcrowded school gym with her sneakers and her quiet fire. 7 months since a single sentence, This needs to be patented. Ripped through the silence and changed everything. And still, not a day passed where I didn't think about how close we came to missing it all. One more cruel comment, one more moment of silence, and she might have walked out of that building believing her work didn't matter. Believing she didn't matter. But she stayed. She stood her ground. And now, every corner of our small apartment had been transformed into a lab. The kitchen table was no longer for meals. It was for diagrams, capacitors, and test wires. The corner of the living room had become her video call setup, complete with a whiteboard she'd bought secondhand with saved-up allowance money. My room now held boxes labeled with voltage readings and part numbers. The apartment smelled like solder and printer paper, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. That summer, Ari joined the mentorship program at the university. Twice a week, we drove over an hour in each direction just so she could spend afternoons in a real lab. She worked beside students nearly twice her age, never intimidated, never out of place. She asked questions, took notes, and most importantly, she contributed. Real contributions. By the third week, her prototype had evolved. The coils were tighter, the energy output more stable, and the design more durable. She was no longer a child with a clever idea. She was an innovator. The head of the lab, a tall woman with thick glasses and a calm, firm voice, pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "Your daughter doesn't wait to be told she belongs. She acts like she already does. That's rare." I held back tears as I thanked her. But deep down, I knew that wasn't something Ari had always had. She had built that step by step, like her generator. From broken parts and borrowed time. At school, things had changed, but not in the way I expected. The girl who had once been invisible was now impossible to ignore. Teachers asked her to speak in front of the class. Students who had once mocked her now quietly admired her. But admiration has a strange edge when you've been an outcast before. People didn't know how to approach her. Some were still cruel, but now in subtler ways. One day, I found a note stuffed in Ari's locker. A crumpled paper scrawled in pencil. "Don't think you're better just because you built a light. You're still the divorce girl." I stared at it for a long time. Ari never mentioned it. She never cried. She never even flinched. But I knew. I knew that being seen didn't mean being safe. Visibility came with weight. And in small towns, that weight was heavier than most could carry. I wanted to confront the school. Demand they find the culprit. But when I brought it up to Ari, she shook her head. "No, Ma. It's not about them. It's about what I do next." And she did what she always did. She worked. She adjusted her designs. She tested and retested. She applied for a Junior Innovators Award and got shortlisted. She created a how-to video for other kids to build their own mini versions. That video, filmed with my phone and edited with free software, got thousands of views. Schools from other states emailed asking if she could speak virtually to their students. And then came the letter. One evening, a manila envelope arrived from the United States Patent and Trademark Office. I stared at it like it was something holy. Ari opened it slowly, carefully, unfolding each page like it might vanish if she moved too fast. It was official. Ari Rivera, 11 years old, had been granted provisional patent status for her kinetic energy generator shoe. We didn't shout. We didn't scream. We sat in silence for a full minute. Then she leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "We did it." Later that night, as she carefully placed the document in a plastic sleeve and taped it to her wall, she asked, "Do you think this means I've proven myself?" I looked at her, at the girl who had built a future from scraps, at the quiet mind who never stopped solving, even when the world told her she didn't belong. I didn't answer right away. I just pulled her close. "You never had to prove anything to me," I said. "But I think now you've reminded a whole lot of people what potential looks like." A few days later, the school principal asked if Ari would be willing to share her journey during the next assembly. Ari agreed, but only on one condition, that she could speak not just about her invention, but about being overlooked, about being labeled, and about how none of that had stopped her. The day of the assembly, I watched from the back of the auditorium. Ari stood at the microphone, holding nothing but a remote in her hand and a single slide behind her, an image of her prototype and the words, "Start with what you have." She spoke with clarity, with grace. with fire in her voice. And when she finished, the room was silent for a long, still moment. Then came the applause. Not polite. Not forced. Real. When she walked off that stage, a teacher handed her a folded note. It was from a student in the audience. You made me believe I can invent too. Thank you. Ari smiled. That night, she didn't say much. But I noticed she added the note to her wall, right beside her patent certificate. Because maybe that's what this was all for. Not for the judges. Not for the applause. But to be the voice someone else needed to hear. And Ari had become that voice. Just by being exactly who she was. Autumn arrived with early winds and streets littered with crisp brown leaves. Ari's Saturdays at the library were now replaced by structured online mentorship sessions. She was assigned to a group of other young inventors, some from other states, others from different countries. Each one had a different project. A water purifier powered by bicycle pedals. A phone charger that ran on hand cranks. A self-cooling tent for disaster zones. And yet, when they introduced themselves, it was Ari who quietly explained her kinetic shoe system with precision and calm authority. She didn't stumble. She didn't defer. She spoke like someone who had found her place. The mentors didn't speak to her like she was a child. They asked for input. They asked what she'd learned through failure. They offered her technical feedback as if she was already one of them. And she was. Not because of a ribbon or a patent, but because she had earned their respect the hard way. Step by step, circuit by circuit. We kept a folder on the kitchen shelf labeled Next Steps. Inside were ideas, printed emails, doodled designs, and a new goal. A full utility patent. Ari was determined to go beyond provisional. She wanted to protect her work not just as a symbol of what she had done, but to open the door for what might come next. She talked about scaling. About partnerships with nonprofits. About building prototypes that could be tested in the field. I was stunned by how big her world had become. One morning, she woke me up early, eyes glowing. I had a dream that the lights in refugee camps could be powered by walking to get water. She had sketched an idea with rubber treads designed to capture more foot pressure, optimizing energy capture on uneven terrain. If we can build enough of these, she said, maybe kids won't have to study by candlelight anymore. It wasn't just invention anymore. It was purpose. But with every rise comes friction. Our apartment complex had never been kind, but now it was especially sharp. Some neighbors had started whispering again. All this attention for a science fair? She thinks she's special now? I heard the words. Sometimes I saw the looks. The worst came one day when someone keyed the side of our car, scratched a word I won't repeat across the door. Ari didn't say anything when she saw it. She just got into the passenger seat, pulled out her notebook, and went back to sketching. That night, I wanted to scream. I wanted to post pictures and demand answers. But Ari touched my arm and said, "Let it go. They don't get to steal my time." She was 13 now. Taller. Quieter. Stronger. The little girl with scuffed shoes and shy eyes had turned into something else entirely. Something steady and unwavering. Then one afternoon an email arrived. It was from a tech startup in Oregon. They had seen Ari's online presentation through the mentorship program and wanted to speak with her about licensing options. Licensing. I didn't even know what that meant. But Ari did. She read every word, nodded slowly, and said, they want to use the energy system in their wearable products. We sat down at the kitchen table, this time not with tears or trembling hands, but with a list of questions she had typed herself. What percentage of profit? Will they manufacture in ethical facilities? Can the product be made available at cost in developing regions? I stared at her, speechless. You don't have to say yes, I told her. She smiled. I know. But I want to learn. Even if I say no, I want to know how this works. Ari arranged a video call. She asked every question calmly. At the end of the meeting, the company rep said, "It's rare to see someone your age this prepared." Ari just said thank you and told them she'd think about it. She turned to me after the call and said, "I'm not rushing. This idea matters. I want to do it right." That weekend, we walked through the park near our apartment. The wind had picked up, And Ari was collecting leaves, not for fun, but because she was testing the durability of biodegradable insulating wraps. She wanted to use them for future prototypes. She stuffed the leaves into her bag, laughing softly to herself. You know, she said as we crossed the bridge over the creek, I used to think people had to give me permission to be smart. I looked at her, heart aching with pride. And now I know I just needed space. And maybe someone who believed in me. I didn't say anything. I just squeezed her hand. We walked in silence until we reached the bench near the edge of the water. She sat down, pulled out her sketchpad, and began drawing a new design. A smaller, more compact system that could fit into slippers or sandals. For elderly people, she said. They walk slower, but the pressure still adds up. And in that moment, watching her pencil move across the paper with absolute clarity, I realized something. Ari didn't win the science fair ribbon that day. But she had started something much bigger. A life not driven by applause or approval. A life built, one step at a time, by the power in her own step. Months turned into a year, and Ari's name was no longer just whispered in school hallways or printed in small-town newspapers. It started to appear in places I never thought possible. Emails from innovation panels, science podcasts, even a small paragraph in a national education journal. But through it all, she stayed grounded. She still washed dishes after dinner. She still borrowed my phone charger and forgot to return it. She still wore her old sneakers, though now they held more than just memories. They carried legacy. We traveled to 2 more showcases that spring. One was hosted by a clean energy nonprofit. The other, a youth tech summit in New York City. It was our first time in a city that big. Ari clutched her backpack the whole ride in. Notebook peeking from the zipper, prototype tucked in protective foam. When we arrived at the convention center, her name badge simply read, Ari Rivera, independent inventor. No school, no label. Just her name and her work. She stood beside a booth that barely had room for her project, answering questions from engineers, nonprofit directors, journalists. I watched from a distance, feeling more like an observer than a mother. She didn't need me to stand behind her anymore. She stood on her own. After her presentation, a woman in a tailored blazer approached. She introduced herself as a director from an international sustainability foundation. We're starting a program for energy innovation in underserved areas, she said. Would Ari be interested in collaborating? My daughter didn't even blink. I'd like to read more about your goals before I say yes, she replied. The woman laughed, impressed. Of course. I'd expect nothing less. That night, in the small hotel room we could barely afford, I watched Ari sit by the window, journal open, writing furiously. Not about awards or interviews, but about capacitor failures, circuit upgrades, field testing. She was thinking bigger. Always bigger. I realized then that while her name was getting noticed, it was her mind that was blazing forward, untouched by noise, unbothered by distraction. Back at home, our life still had limits. I still worked weekends. Bills still stacked like they always had. But something was different now. Ari's energy had shifted the air around us. People who once turned their backs now held doors open. Teachers invited her to co-lead science clubs. The school even launched a small grant program for student innovators, calling it the STEP Initiative, named after her project. And yet, there were moments of doubt. One night, after a long day, I found Ari sitting on the floor, legs crossed, prototype in pieces beside her. Her eyes were red. Her journal lay open, filled with scribbled lines and crossed-out designs. I can't get it to store more than 15 seconds of light, she whispered. If I can't make it last longer, it won't help in real emergencies. I sat beside her and didn't speak for a long time. Then I said, You once made light from scraps no one cared about. Maybe this part, the frustration, is just another piece of the build. She nodded, wiped her eyes, and went back to work. And that's how she always moved. Not by shortcuts. Not by applause. But by persistence. By belief. By clarity of purpose. By the end of that year, she was invited to co-author a research paper with a team of university students working on wearable energy systems. She contributed diagrams, ran simulations, spoke during their virtual presentations. They introduced her not as a guest or a student, but as part of the team. She also received a letter from the patent office. Her utility patent had been officially filed. We framed the notice and placed it next to the original ribbon from the science fair. Side by side. Proof of where it began, and how far it had come. One evening, as we watched the sunset from the fire escape, Ari turned to me and said, "Do you ever think about how none of this would have happened if we left the gym that day?" I nodded slowly. Every single day. She leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "I'm glad we stayed." And I knew she wasn't just talking about the science fair. She was talking about believing, about standing, about not letting the world tell her what she could be, about staying with her idea when no one else saw it. And now, that same idea was lighting up more than just bulbs. It was lighting the path forward. Ari didn't need the world's validation to keep building. She didn't need a perfect lab, or the right last name, or polished words. She just needed space. And someone who believed. And now, as I watched her sketch her next design under the golden sky, I realized something I hadn't said out loud yet. She was no longer the girl they whispered about. She was the girl who built her own future. One step, one wire, one spark at a time. And her light? It wasn't going out. Not now. Not ever.